Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's really prestigious to speak in front of this audience and specifically in Asian society. While we all kind of know and have a background, and the way the talk began when Sir and Ma'am has perfectly seen the premise of it, one starting the story of human sorrow and the other talking about the structural policies and inadequacies that revolve around partition, I could rather channelize this discussion to the stories of interconnectedness and in-betweenness that dominates the narrative of partition. It doesn't mean that it has ended. Something has really parted their ways. Rather, there is a constant in-betweenness and interconnectedness that we counter through the archives, through the oral histories, through cinemas, through book and every other medium. And that I've just chosen a few anecdotes to share with you all to understand how this bordering, rebordering, the other way, and this entire border making process is a continuous challenge that dominates in academia and in everyday discussion. For example, I have taken out the time from 1947 to 52, the initial 5 years after partition, and there I am trying to show that how in eastern part of Bengal, eastern part of India, it was a continuous process, not solely through direct violence, direct riots and bloodshed, but how structural violence, routinized threats became embedded in the history of East Bengal. And here, whenever we are talking about the condition of Hindus or Muslims in Bengal, we are always referring to United Bengal in our psyche. So it's not, but yes, for academic purpose, we're dividing it West Bengal, East Pakistan, but actually we are finding that the history is so much interconnected at this point of time that whatever we discuss, we're discussing comparing these two regions actually. So these two regions, they are not just cartographic regions, they're actually in psychological borders, they are actually still connected like in this invisible umbilical cord. For example, when we are seeing there are different kinds of, deprivations, frustrations that are found in our island records, not in the government documents especially, but also say about the migration certificates or in any. There are numerous sources that are going into that. But as, summary, we can talk about first a kind of economic strangulation that the minorities faced. It's not about that I am going to Kolkata from Dhaka. When I am living as a Hindu, my Hindu tailor, my Hindu fisherman might be, they are all losing their professions because they're losing their clients. So one is economic strangulation, but does losing money, losing capital, that is everything. Isn't the freedom to exercise your religious sentiments, the culture, isn't that a capital also? So when we are finding events like when the Muslim National Guards, the local Muslim vigilant bodies, they are chanting communal slurs against the minority, or they are preparing some kind of what we say Bengali chhara to taunt the minority over there. This kind of directly impacting the way they pursue their cultural practices to some extent. That is also how they are losing out capital. It's not like that they're losing their land for that matter. They're losing out their existence by land for a temple is getting confiscated in the new regime. And the capital where I'm talking about, the assets that I'm talking about, it also encompasses the idea of gender, because here the body of women grant both the grant of partition. And here we can find not only really accounts of rape or abduction, obviously this is there, but again there is this constant threat on a women that we can find. It's like, if I take out an anecdote, and there are many like that when Hindus were leaving from East Bengal, the Muslims over there, a few of them, they were saying that the men can leave, but they should leave the women behind because they're the fixed deposit supreme nation. So this is a subjective, routinized violence that was happening. And here again, this is very interesting, as a scholar of history might share, that in our newspaper, there has been detailed report of how one Apa Mukherjee, she was a young girl, 18 year of age. She was coming from Dinajpur with her father. She was shifting to Calcutta because her father felt that his daughters were not safe anymore in East Bengal. So what he did, he was taking away his daughters from Dinajpur to Calcutta in a train. In between, a group of Muslim men, they liked the train and they board the train, and Abha, they purposefully take Abha, the eldest daughter, with him. The leader of the Muslim gang was Bashir. And then this man, the father of Abha, he comes to Kolkata. He writes numerous petitions to the government, to the chief secretaries, that my daughter has been abducted, kidnapped. And this is the tale I was talking about. And finally, with investigation, it finds out that Aha actually was in love with Bashi, and it was a personal love affair. And then they were really coming from East Pakistan. Abha got the opportunity to elope with her lover. So, without partition, this might have been a story of elopement, and there have been a women's agency. But with partition, it became a story of abduction and a challenge to women's honor. So, in this short period of time, what I'm trying to suggest that these stories, this interconnectedness, they belong here, and we as historians, as social scientists, we must always be careful about not repeating this. Yes, there is horror not only on 14th August. It's not a horror remembrance is not only on our one day, especially eastern border of the country. It's a sustained horror, and this is still happening. We are finding many reports where they are saying that people are coming with fear in their eyes and pain in their heart. And as a sovereign independent nation, we should keep in mind that this pain in their eyes and this pain in their heart should not be repeated. Thank you.